Deputy Minister, Honourable John Jeffery, our esteemed panelists and members of the audience in this time of COVID, it is indeed a privilege for me to welcome you to this important webinar in this week of International Human Rights and International Anti-Corruption Day on the 10th and 9th of December respectively. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the organizing partnership, namely the Leaders for Integrity and the Active Citizens Movement, and hosted by Macrocom. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture has revealed wide-scale abuse of power, contradictory testimonies from the various senior leaders in society, and evidence from whistleblowers. Both Deputy Chief Justice Zondo and President Ramaphosa have commended whistleblowers as being true patriots for coming forward, but who have borne the brunt of simply reporting of wrongdoing, corruption and crime by being hounded, victimized, losing their livelihoods, and in some cases losing their lives, as we've recently witnessed the brutal and barbaric assassination of single-parent Ms. Babita Dearkar, and in Women's Month. Subsequently, we've witnessed Mr. Athol Williams, who identified 39 alleged corrupt criminals in his testimony at the Zondo Commission, fleeing the country to save his life. And many believe that the 8 days of unrest in July was aimed at intimidating whistleblowers and extending the culprits' impunity. This past weekend's newspapers, we've seen one of the state-owned entities pursuing some of its employees who have heeded Justice Zondo and President Ramaphosa's call to come forward and give testimony. This has put at the fore our Constitution, the laws and tools available to safeguard such champions of our constitutional democracy. And one such is the Protected Disclosures Act, or better known as the PDA. So to talk about the PDA this afternoon, the application and implications for our young constitutional democracy and its citizens, we have an esteemed panel, and we have a very seasoned moderator and facilitator. Our moderator and facilitator is none other than Ms. Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki.
Thank you for joining us on this day, which is an important day for our country. Recently, we witnessed the disengagement of millions of South African citizens, as evidenced by the last municipal or local government elections, from the institutions of democracy and from public institutions. This ought to concern us all, as it indicates to some degree a crisis of public trust. This disengagement came after wide-scale corruption was reported with regard to PPE corruption, COVID corruption of other kinds, spanning across our public institutions. So today we have an esteemed panel which is going to help us deal with the issues that are being raised by citizens throughout the country, and that is the abuse of public resources and the general corruption of the values of our society, which have a devastating impact on the economy and on the rights of citizens enshrined in South Africa's great constitution.
The organization believes that the plight of whistleblowers and the lack of legal protection and personal support is a matter of extreme importance, as whistleblowers make huge sacrifices when calling out malfeasance and corruption, and the movement further called for witness protection mechanisms to be incorporated into the legislation. We have these two laws. Obviously there is a problem of whistleblowers not being protected, or whistleblowers being killed or threatened, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Whether it's sufficient to say that those whistleblowers then should be asking the police for protection or some kind of arrangements to be made for them. For example, when there is a case in which people are being threatened, the presiding officer, the prosecutor can and are given protection whilst there is a threat. There's a threat assessment done. But we're open to improvements being made. What I hope from this engagement is to hear more inputs and more discussions on the type of amendments, the types of improvements that should be made, because we are facing a pandemic of corruption, and we need to take greater steps to ensure that corruption is combated, and those responsible for that corruption are effectively prosecuted, found guilty, and sentenced for their crimes.
Good afternoon to the Honourable Deputy Minister, good afternoon members of the panelists, and good afternoon to our audience. Whistleblowing in South Africa has been a topical discussion in the recent periods. The overarching protection of whistleblowers in South Africa is contained in the Constitution, while the main legislation relevant to whistleblowing is the Protected Disclosures Act of 2000. However, there are other legal texts such as the Labour Relations Act, the Companies Act, and the Protection Against Harassment Act. We generally tend to focus on the Protected Disclosure Act, and I'm just going to highlight some of the different legislations which can also assist whistleblowers. The Constitution broadly sets out sections that offer whistleblowers protection. Specifically, Section 9.1 states that everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Section 16, subsection 1b, states that everyone has the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom to receive or impart information or ideas. Section 23, subsection 1 states everyone has the right to fair labor practices. Moving on to the Protected Disclosure Act, the PDA is central to South African whistleblowing legislation. The PDA came into force in February 2001 and was subsequently amended in 2017. The Act applies to people both in the public and private sector. The PDA is aimed at employees but excludes volunteers and independent contractors. The main aim of the PDA is to protect whistleblowers from being subjected to occupational detriment in their work environment. The protection offered under the PDA only apply where, first, it is indeed a disclosure that has been made. Secondly, the disclosure is classified as a protected disclosure.
Thank you very much, Chair, Honourable Deputy Minister, colleagues and friends. I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today, not necessarily in the broader context of the Protected Disclosures Act, but on another allied subject, which is the non-disclosure agreements themselves and the whistleblower. I call my presentation Dealing with the Message. So before I begin, I think I need to remind all of us that the 10th of December is in fact International Human Rights Day, and it is important to remember and emphasize that whistleblowers are in fact human rights defenders because they expose wrongdoing and corruption. That has already been established by colleagues already. And victims of corruption are poor people who do not receive their socioeconomic rights, such as the right to housing, water, food, education, health, safe environments, because state funds are diverted into the pockets of politicians. The language of service delivery cannot divert the truth that people are denied their rights. Once in our history, the denial of rights was a rallying cry. We've come to a stage now where that might be a rallying cry again. And so this denial of delivery service is often not due to the lack of funds, but to pure greed arising out of power.
As a segue to what you just said, Chair, my brief remarks are premised on two things. Firstly, that whistleblowers are an essential part of any anti-corruption framework or set of mechanisms and institutions. Secondly, that in South Africa there is a crisis in relation to the protection of such whistleblowers. So those are my starting points, and I take them as givens. I won't seek to justify or argue or defend those 2 points. I hope that most of the people, if not everybody, in this discussion agrees with those 2 starting points. If not, no doubt we can debate them. So the question then is, well, what sort of legal and other protection do you need in order to safeguard the role that whistleblowers can play in combating corruption and other forms of wrongdoing? And Chair, you were kind enough, perhaps misguidedly, to thank me for my role in the passage of the Protected Disclosures Act. It seems to me that rather you should be blaming me because, and others, because it seems fairly obvious now that it is not working as well as it could or should. And therefore there is therefore a need to review and reconsider its provisions and reconsider its underlying conceptual and other premises, which is what I'm going to touch on in just a moment.
In the context of this growing use of method whistleblowers, the main concern to me is whether we can ask a question and answer it correctly and honestly. Have we failed to protect the whistleblowers in the country? Have we failed to fight petty and big criminal activities in society? Are we winning in this battle against criminality? If we can't protect whistleblowers, who can we protect? Because even those who likely are not killed are harassed and victimized in the institutions, and an unofficial blacklist for whistleblowers seems to be created to ensure that whistleblowers are marginalized. And all of you, the panelists who have been speaking, are raising both of the dangers of marginalizing and killing of the whistleblowers.
Accountability Now has recently addressed a letter to the President drawing attention to a lot of the facts that Zweli has just traversed, and to the limping nature of the legislative response to the lot of whistleblowers. There's a great deal that civil society can do to help whistleblowers. We are trying to encourage insurance companies to offer short-term insurance policies to the private sector, and indeed to the state-owned enterprises as well, that would have the effect of insuring people against the downside of the act of whistleblowing. I think that it would also be possible to encourage the private sector to set up a fund that assists whistleblowers who are suffering because of their having blown the whistle. The first thing that happens is that you need an army of lawyers to deal with the army of lawyers that are employed by those against whom you've blown the whistle.
Hi, good afternoon, comrades. I'm Prof, the chair of the Active Citizens Movement. I would like to invite all the panelists, others who are on this webinar, to walk this journey with us and the whistleblowers as we make an attempt to reform the PDA. You can get in touch with us on our email address, activeactivecnsa@gmail.com or 067 007 7132. Thank you very much. A wonderful webinar.
I'm just throwing a caution to the forum that, we don't realize it, but we're well on our way towards the final year of the 6th Parliament. And I'd just like to know from Deputy Minister John Jeffery what he thinks are the prospects for pushing legislation. The ones that Paul Hoffman referred to, the kind of amendments that we were pushing for, the whistleblower protection, but even taking a closer look at the legislation that governs Parliament itself, because all roads lead to Parliament ultimately. And with the voter turnout and registration, we've seen that Parliament and the system is losing legitimacy in huge droves. So what can we expect? Where should we be focusing our attention? How can we as active citizens help strengthen Parliament and as a result the state as a whole?
Could Dr. Peter proceed?
Thanks very much, Thandeka. I've had a long relationship with the Special Investigations Unit and also the National Prosecuting Authority, and we've attempted on many occasions to try and gain the support from business, but most importantly from decision makers in government. As far back as 6 years ago, we approached the government and said that we seriously needed business chambers against crime and civil society against corruption. But to reinforce what Paul Hoffman was saying, is that we're totally ignored. And that is a problem that exists with COPTA. That is a situation that exists with those decision makers.
I am going to thank you all today for joining us, and I would like to make a special mention of whistleblowers who report crimes of a sexual nature in our institutions. It's especially during the 16 days of non-violence against women. I remember my favorite whistleblowers, and one of them being in Durban, Rogani, shout out to you, who report crimes of a sexual nature being committed against children in schools by people in authority like school principals, to those whistleblowers who often are not heard and worked out of the system for daring to speak up. I say to you, courage to you all.
Thank you, Thandeka, and thanks to all the colleagues and the panelists. I think I just want to leave you with one final comment. Firstly, I must thank you especially that we put this together in the last week. And we know it's very short notice, but active citizen movements have been driving the support program for whistleblowers, and Leaders for Integrity have just, this is the prelude to the official launch early next year. And together the partnership hopes to provide a range of services in terms of supporting the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. And I think we can't ignore this important week being International Human Rights Week and International Anti-Corruption Week. And I think listening to the panelists and to the inputs from various colleagues on the group, I think we can't ignore the role of the Zondo Commission. We could, in many respects, treat it as a kind of a pressure test or a referendum on our young 28-year-old democracy. Some people, some leaders in society believe we're a failed society. I'd like to believe we're not a failed society, but we're failing unless we do something drastically. So I think it was very encouraging to hear from Deputy Minister John Jeffery opening his doors, in addition to the colleagues who have made submissions to Parliament and to the Presidency, but to engaging with the Department of Justice, because they are the lead institutions in terms of implementing these policy reforms.